Western North Dakota. Women and men in blue are coming at you straight off the cuff today. Took me a second there, Mikey. Been a lot of information shared today with training and kind of what we're bringing forward today. There is for the viewers and the listeners out there, today is kind of a hybrid episode for us. Mike and I had talked. We're in the middle of a big training symposium here in the community, brought forward over 3 days. We're going to be trying to grab these what I'm going to just say, these elite trainers, instructors, experts in the field, to you guys to kind of talk about what's being brought into the community for law enforcement and give you a taste of what we're trying to accomplish here as a department for you, and a lot of good stuff, hopefully. So we're hopeful and lucky to have about 20 minutes here with each presenter that we had brought in today. We have Mr. Eric Daigle, DLG.
How are you, sir?
Yeah, we're doing good, man. I know in each one of your podcasts, you always talk. You try to find that quote and present it to the person that you're interviewing. And so one that came to mind to me today, and I know it's one of Mikey's go-tos, but the only thing for evil to succeed it takes is just a few good men, right, to do nothing. Paraphrasing there. And today, I think there was a lot of inspiration to the group of law enforcement officers, first responders that you talked to, but. Maybe just kind of, I think it's important for the listeners and the viewers to hear today maybe from you what hopefully you were looking to accomplish and get across to everybody and some things about the messaging that you provided us.
Yeah, well, first of all, hey, thank you for the opportunity. And it was a great day today with men and women from both law enforcement and fire in the room. And the goal is, and I apologize, got that raspy voice. That's what happens after 8 hours on the stage, right?
I'm sure there's some listeners out there that like that. So.
Gets a little raspy, unfortunately. But just an introduction. My name is Eric Daigle. I'm an attorney, former Connecticut State Trooper. I always describe it as I overachieved myself into another job, not the job I wanted, but another job. I've been in the legal world for about 20 plus years, dealing with law enforcement liability and application, and you can look at a little bit of what we do in the area of DaigleLawGroup.com. And some of the areas that we focus on. And that was really the highlight of the discussion today is when I do a training class every year, I try to highlight some of the key legal issues. Well, number one, it's legal, right? So you got to make it as entertaining as possible. But one of the things that listeners don't understand is our officers are so there's so much legal that they have to understand. The court system produces so much guiding application and topics which people would expect, like use of force, to all sorts of topics on search and seizure and arrest and First Amendment rights to record, and it really becomes overwhelming for the average officer. And so one of the things that I like to do, and I know you've been a follower for a while, is I like to try to make it as simple as possible, right? Because you've all had people give you instruction and you just can't stand listening to them.
Turn it out.
And so it takes a lot of energy. I hope I did a good job on stage today of giving the energy, but you got to have a little bit of humor and a little bit of reality in the application. And the key part is, for me, is just always, because of what I do for a living, as I travel around the country, I get to see law enforcement in its finest and in its worst. And I never want it to be in its worst. So I use that as an energy to really focus at everything I do as to, hey, what can I give for advice to young officers, to experienced officers? That's how I got here. That's how you got here, right? Mentorship and opportunities. And I'm just looking to pass it on. That's key.
Sure. You on our ride in from the airport, we talked a little bit about, what the makeup of the community is and kind of what makes things tick up here. And today you shared some things on a big map in front of everybody, talking about legislation, these trends, and you just highlighted, traveling the country. Our community, they're extremely loyal, and in many regards, we're very insulated to a lot of the things that you're highlighting today, and which is good to prepare us to keep that insulation.
True. That's key.
But maybe could you talk at all about traveling the country and seeing these things, and then seeing North Dakota, learning a little bit about it, or just the center of the country, some stuff there that they could take away from, and as far as how good we have it, where law enforcement's getting it right. And
you have it good. And being insulated is not a bad thing, that's for sure. I mean, I don't want you coming to recruit to the East Coast, because a lot of my people will get on a plane and come here. So what we talked about today, and what listeners if you're insulated, you're not going to know this, but the industry it ebbs and flows, and there's good times and there's bad times. And when you look over the last, let's go through 3 or 4 years, COVID and the challenges that COVID gave us led to a kind of an opportunity. And that opportunity, in my opinion, was the aftermath of the death of George Floyd. And what I mean by that is that the death of George Floyd was an ability for legislators across the country, states across the country, including the federal government, to impose legislation that really hampered. It wasn't all bad, but there are challenges to it that I'm concerned about, specifically when it comes to changing standards applicable to use of force. North Dakota, interestingly, was one of 2 states that didn't have any reform legislation. They're the only 2 states in the country in 2021. Now, the states around you, Wyoming, some of the red states, had legislation, but it got defeated. But if you go down to the rest of the country, kind of do the U shape throughout the country, you're looking at 30 states who in 1 year got extensive police reform application, and it's not all good. Everybody likes to believe that using the word reform is a positive, that it's going to make something better. But it has to be bad to be better. And while the death of George Floyd was a tragedy, and just like we see other deaths and incidents across the country, the population, your community needs to understand a few things. And that is, there's 17,000 law enforcement agencies in this country, 680,000 sworn cops. Let's be honest, right? Whatever the job is, lawyers, doctors, politicians, firefighters are always perfect, but there's always going to be bad apples. And the key is that we try very hard in the industry to address the bad apples, to remove the bad apples, and to not let the bad apples define us. When in actuality, it's the bad apples that parts of the country use to define who we are. And one of the things that is good for your community is that, nobody wants to work in a place where they're not appreciated. Listen, you can expect your officers to do things correctly. You can hold them accountable. You can expect that they're gonna be professional, duty, honor, community, pride, integrity. But they still want to know that people appreciate them. It's no different than any other job. You heard my jokes on the fire guys today, right?
Well, we appreciated those a lot.
Yeah, it gets frustrating. The fire guys try really; they're always the heroes. But the building burns down, and I don't understand.
The basement was filled with water.
like we saved the foundation. You're the hero. We're like, what? That's just an unfair standard. It's unfair.
Yeah, they. Mike and I, in the course of this, they hear us, prop up and try to really sell what we're doing on a day-to-day from a specific department out to the community. And we try to do our best to remove those biases. As you said today, we all have them. We have to admit that we have them and that they're there and the problems that they create. And again, we try really hard to bring those up and say, hey, but could you talk at all, maybe just from an outsider, they could hear an outsider voice on the things you're seeing, law enforcement, in the course of you representing them in these very high liability litigation cases, what we're doing well, and then I think they probably would appreciate to hear where we're not doing very well and where we need to get better.
Yeah, doing well is always easy. As I said in class, I'm a positive guy, so I like positive. I want doing well, and I think we did it so well. That's why the people that are, they're not fully on board with our process. I think community policing and our dedication to the community and our relationship with the community across the country, I think that's one of the reasons why we're in the challenge that we're in, is because we've done such a good job that the people that might not be fans of law enforcement, they have to find a way to separate us from the community. They have to divide us from the community. And they want the community to see us as soldiers, as RoboCops, and we want to work as hard to show our community that, we call it humanizing the badge. If the one thing I want everybody listening to this podcast to remember is that the only difference, I'm a huge fan of Sir Robert Peel, as you know, the father of modern day law enforcement. And Sir Robert Peel has a lot of great writings as he built the largest police department in 1857. And what he talked about, which was first called the Peelers and now called the Bobbies in London. And what he talked about was the fact that the success is the police are the public and the public are the police. Right? Our success is 100% about our interaction and our support from the public. But the public needs to remember that the only difference between us and them is that we come to work every day and put the badge on. That's the only difference. On the weekends, we go to the same church. We bring our kids to the same soccer field. We go to the same grocery store. So what's frustrating for the younger officers, and I think what we do the worst right now, and I think one of the things that I talked about today on stage is that we allow a negative narrative to be too loud, right? I mean, we are not the type of people in law enforcement to tout our successes as much as we probably should have, right? I mean, think about it. If we were the social media generation, every time we did our job, you saved somebody's life or you arrested a criminal, you'd be on Instagram and telling it to everybody. But that's not the way this industry works. So the industry the people don't get to see that part of the industry. And I think one of our failures right now is that we are not controlling the narrative, that we're not sharing. And what I would ask for your community is that they understand that we just don't have the capacity to do that. We're not the type of people that need the pat on the head because we did our job. We did our job because we like doing our job. Where we need the community, though, is to say, wow, that was a great job. Thanks for handling that. I mean, we saw it just 2 weeks ago in Nashville. Those officers responding to that school shooting did a fabulous job. Right. The officers didn't come out afterwards and do selfies in the front and say, we did a great job. But the community stepped up to really appreciate the fact that the officers took a very difficult task and did it correctly.
I see when we're talking, I do a little bit of teaching on the side. Mikey does our Citizens Police Academy up at the department. And one of the things that I think I've seen over the last couple of years, Force Science, for anybody who doesn't know, a company out there that does a lot of research on behalf of law enforcement. But this whole thing about human factors, I believe, has picked up some steam in the last 2 to 3 years, and getting the community to understand the human factors goes back to what you just said about we're not any different. They are us, we are them, go home at the end of the day and dealing with these things and decision making. Is there anything maybe you could highlight on that human fact, getting our community or people to understand some of those things related on a real basic level and the human factors of the job, and as you've seen it representing us as a litigator?
Mikey, he's really good at softballs. Like, he just lobs them right up there. It's perfect, right? Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that society doesn't understand about this concept of use of force. Use of force is a reaction to a situation, right? And what we do know as human beings is that actions and reactions are physiological applications, right? And the thing that is frustrating, a lot of what I do, as you know, is use of force. And a lot of what we talked about today is use of force related. And the challenge of use of force is, well, first and foremost, let's get one thing right. You're never going to watch a video of an officer having to use a level of force to take a suspect into custody and say, well, that was perfect.
Right.
I mean, it's never going to look good on video. And I don't think society expects it to look good on video, but it's just not. So the number one issue is that the news media is just going to play the video over and over again, and it doesn't look good. But what they don't apply to it is the decision-making factors. In order to understand what we call human factors, the easiest way to explain it is just this. You've all seen the movie, when you've taken my classes, so you know I'm a big fan. You've all seen the movie of Sully,
yes.
Sullenberger, Captain Sullenberger, landing the airplane on the Hudson River. And so this is not law enforcement. And people are probably saying, why the hell is he talking about that? Well, because if I talk about it in the law enforcement sense, people say, as they do with Force Science, well, you just make this up as an excuse. But in every aspects of our life, the human being has to take in information, process the information, make a decision, and act, right? And every human being is different. So some do it quicker than others. Some do it better than others. And a lot of times when I'm trying to explain this to judges, to prosecutors, to even citizens, I like to use Captain Sullenberger's response, because after he landed in the Hudson, everybody said, well, wait a minute, you should have made it to the airport. You shouldn't have landed in the Hudson. And even the NTSB, if you watch the movie, you know, they use simulations to prove that he should have landed. And one of the things that happened in there is that they proved that they didn't take into account reaction time. You know, when the birds hit the airplane, Captain Sully had to analyze the situation and come up with options and make a decision, right, wrong, or indifferent. And there's a line in the movie that I like to use when dealing with use of force. And he says it as he's defending himself in the inquest. He says, you know, if you're trying to find human failure or human error, you have to make it human. And the same thing with our officers. They're not robots. And experience, time on the job, decision-making, and confidence all are going to come into a play on how the officer or in what manner the officer reacts to the situation that they're faced with.
Yeah, no, that's really good stuff. Is there one thing you're hearing from law enforcement more than anything else as people are reaching out to you to come to them? Are there any emerging trends moving forward here in the next year to 2 years that the community should be aware of? I mean, obviously we want to be aware of it and in the know, but moving forward?
Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest concerning aspects that I see on a national level right now is that obviously recruitment and retention is a huge issue. It all boils together. If we're under intense scrutiny for use of force, of course people are not going to want to do the job, right?
There was one thing today you talked about that too. You parceled between the two and talked about the generation coming in on the recruiting end versus the focus on the retention end, right. Separating that and in between there a little bit, which was an interesting thing to hear you talk about.
I mean, let's be honest. Recruitment across this country is challenging. Your society should know that the industry as a whole, every police department has a 20% opening, 20% open officer slots, because you know, the national narrative is challenging the new generation to want to be servants. But there's one thing that we all know is being experienced is we need police officers. We need police officers who want to do the job, that want to sacrifice. Retention is a big issue because the community and the department expend resources to make this, once an officer comes in, to make them a good officer. And if they don't come in for the right reason, or they're not getting enough support, both at home and in general life, then we've seen more people leave now than ever before. And that will really hurt our industry because you've invested in those people with money and training and equipment, and then they're leaving. And now it means you start somebody at ground zero instead of year 7. You can't make that person up. That was the hire from 7 years ago. So now you have nobody at that level. And it is currently a challenge for us in the industry.
In North Dakota, I think, sits at the bottom of the scale related to the training for our North Dakota citizens and locals, if they know this or not. You talked about the intensity of some trainings out there, be it Petco or what have you. But, you know, North Dakota, we're at a 12-week academy. You know, I think we're tied for the bottom of the barrel when it comes to those total hours. Do you see that going forward? Do you see anything mandating those things to increase? How do you see some of that playing out?
Well, interestingly enough, we just did a resolution. Dr. Bill Lewinsky from Force Science and the training section of IACP just did a resolution. And I steal Bill's thunder in this because he uses it in training all the time. 12 weeks is not enough for a police officer. It's just not. An average, just for some numbers for the group, an average police officer in this country goes to the police academy for about 24 weeks, 24 to 26 weeks.
So we're not average.
You're far below average. You might have been averages about 3 decades ago. But the other thing is in 24 weeks, that's 480 hours of training, right? And about 120 of it is going to be use of force. And what I used in class today is that in Petco, the company that cuts your dog's hair, they won't let you touch a dog unless you have 800 hours of training. That's a Dr. Lewinsky special right there. Even if you look at in the state, I don't know what yours is, but I would look at what does it take to get a cosmetology license in this state, to cut hair, to bleach hair, to do all that. I guarantee you it takes them more hours to get a license to cut your hair than it does to train a police officer who we're going to give a badge and a gun and the right to, and the ability to take away people's constitutional rights. And so as an industry, we're very focused on that because we want our officers to be prepared and properly trained to do the job correctly. Because if not, we lose trust with our community, right? And here, this is one of the challenges. Your department didn't decide the training's 12 weeks, right?
Right.
But the end result is going to affect your relationship with your community. Because when an officer makes a poor decision, they're going to say, well, you should have trained him more. Well, that's not your decision. It's the standard. It should be changed. And legislatively, it should be changed. It should be requirements, and it should be funded because it's a serious application. It's a serious job.
Is there, with the resolution for you and Bill, you said you talked about...
There's a resolution to increase adult learning strategies in law enforcement training. I think we are, we're not good. We're just not. We need to be better. Death by PowerPoint's not going to work. It's time to really embrace the educational market for our officers and get them. And this is something that we focused on today, which is I have as you know, I have a very large philosophy on training, and we've moved a lot of our training online. We have single user, Path of the Guardian mindset training, supervisory, continued education training, and it's fully understanding that we have to, by law and by application, we have to give people the skill sets they need to be successful. And we haven't done that for a long, as an industry. And we need to look back and say, just because we didn't do it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it going forward. Our communities deserve it. Our citizens deserve it. And more importantly, our officers deserve it. They deserve to be prepared and to handle the situations they're faced with.
Yeah, no, that's well said. 8 hours, I know, is a long time to keep a group engaged, and watching throughout the crowd today, that was, by the end of it, you could still see heads were propped up and they were pretty bright-eyed and watching and listening.
Wasn't mine, though.
Yeah, to the information and that content out there. So I know Mike and I, we really enjoyed it today.
I think you guys, listen, just shout out to you guys for taking something that may not have been normal in the industry out here and realizing that the reason why communities and businesses and entities all over the state should support it is it does a couple of things. Number one, you don't need a guy from Connecticut to come in and I see how difficult you made it to get here. So you don't need that, but there's a benefit of that, right? There's a value in people hearing things, what they might not agree with, they might not understand, they might not even want, but we expand skill sets. And number two, the benefit is for your community isn't it that one of the large benefits here is they have 8 hours of training, but they also have the ability to interact, to get to know each other. And the one thing that we do know is criminals don't stay in one town. Nowadays they move all over the place, and they commit burglaries all over the place. They do things all over the place. And a large benefit, which this symposium will support, and a hell of a job you guys did, is that you get to work with, you get to know people from other jurisdictions and build on professionalism and relationships so that you can better serve your community. So while people may look at the amount of money that these things cost and say, oh yeah, the cops and the firefighters are having a great day today, the end result is the bang for your buck, lack of a better term, is huge.
Yeah, and they'll be getting together tonight for a social hour, and those ideas are going to be exchanged. I know you're going to be around, and I'm sure they're going to be maybe bombarding you a little bit after they go off script a little bit.
But I'll tell you, the huge part this morning was having, the chief and the mayor to welcome the group is what it shows is that this is not just a training environment, right? There's everybody, and the fact that you got so much funding and support from the community on this shows that it is a community that is all dedicated. And I really got a kick out of some of your videos of you and the guys in the fire department. I don't know what you got, what weird stuff you got going on.
That's Lieutenant Handel's doing it.
Yeah, but it's pretty cool. And listen, you're all there for the same purpose. You're all there to serve the community and doing a hell of a job. So
yeah. No, that's well received on our end. Really appreciate it today, Eric. And tomorrow, I don't think you've crossed paths with her, but Dr. Catherine Kuhlman, we've shared just a little bit, and she's kind of a leader out there with the wellness end of it, and that can be sometimes hard to deliver the message, and so we're looking forward to seeing how that's going to be brought forward, and pretty optimistic about it.
Well, let's put it into perspective. If we can't find new ones, and we can't keep some of the ones that are here, we better do everything in our power to make sure that we're taking care of the ones that have chosen to stay.
Yeah. That might be the best way to wrap this up with you. So the next clip we'll have up is going to be Codey. That'll be coming following, and appreciate it, Eric.
Much appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, thanks. Safe travels.
All right.
You are listening to Off the Cup Podcast with Dickinson, PD.
All right, here we are, day number 2, First Responder Symposium, off the cuff, coming straight at you guys. Running a hybrid version here of the episode. Mikey and I bringing forward our keynote speakers that we're bringing in as part of the First Responder Symposium. And today, day number 2 was, yesterday we talked to Eric here for a while, and you guys have watched that, and that was related to some legal liability and some risk and different things like that for the profession. And day number 2, we were looking to center on the wellness, mental health aspect of the profession and the job, and continuing to try to bring attention for all of our professionals here in the area, and bring light and try to Our guest here today talked about reducing the stigma, I guess, if for lack of some better words with it. But we have with us here today Dr. Codey Kuhlman.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was a really fun day, I think, for the group. You had complimented the group a number of different times, and they were really engaged, we thought, throughout the course of everything that you had brought to them. And there was for our listeners, our audience is primarily, our community or surrounding area. This plays on Channel 19, or one of our television stations here too. They watch us, and so it gives you an idea of who's out there hearing the message. But just thought maybe today you could tell them a little bit about yourself, and then we can dive into some of the highlights and the bullet points of today, and what you were hoping to accomplish, and things our community can maybe feel good about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me. And so I'm a police psychologist, and I'm based in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I mean, my life's work, my entire occupation is built upon supporting first responders, to include police officers, dispatchers, firefighters, correctional officers, and really just focusing on this population that I feel like is really underserved as far as mental health goes. I think there's few competent resources for when officers or firefighters really need help. And the reality is that this is obviously a very stressful occupation with unique occupational stressors. And so I've been very fortunate to be able to kind of just find myself in this niche. And so I do counseling. I have people that work for me that do a lot of counseling. We do pre-hire psychs to make sure at least we're trying to hire the best people. And probably one of the most interesting things is that whenever there's a major critical incident, whether there's an officer-involved shooting, or the other week it was a 4-person fatal vehicle crash, mass casualty incidents, is that I get to support in the aftermath of those, which is stressful and exciting all at the same time. And my favorite thing is going around the country and getting to speak about this, and just really helping agencies establish their wellness and talk about mental health.
Yeah, and I know that's just one of the things I was going to ask you about. You are here at the conference, but I mean, you've been, highlighted on Fox and CBS and some really big networks and out there doing things. And so the interaction like we're seeing today with our group, that's where you find maybe that's where the core of it is for you.
It is. It's like whenever you can get the biggest audience, you can make the biggest impact. And so I love working one-on-one with people and being able to help them through their personal struggles and their personal traumas. But there's such a bigger audience where I can reach more people and I think sometimes make a bigger impact to the more people that are hearing the message.
Sure. You looked at, you brought up like what got you to do this, what you're doing now, which you're very good at. And again, today, Mike and I, just before you walked in here to the Quasi studio for us, just talked about the older we get, the more we kind of enjoy hearing these kinds of things versus maybe when you're younger, and you think you're a little more bulletproof and some stuff like that. But so the things that got you leaning and pointing towards this realm of and helping us as a profession were there. What about since you stepped through the door, some things you've learned and more that you didn't know before, or as your career has progressed here, things that have caught you off guard that our community would appreciate hearing from you?
There's very few things that catch me off guard now. I feel like I've heard almost everything. There's no shock value doesn't exist anymore. Sometimes I feel like clients, cops, firefighters, they'll try to tell me something in order to get a reaction, but it doesn't really work anymore because it's like I've seen and heard just so much at these days. But I feel like I personally have the best job in the world. As an officer or as a firefighter, you have a great job where it's different every day. You get to help people, and for me, it's very much the same. I could never do the job. I told a couple of people today. They're like, "Well, what got you into this?" And I said, "Well, I wanted to be a cop, but I won't put my hair up." That's.
You should have said that today. I don't think you brought that up today.
A couple of people were talking to me about it, and it's like I'm too much of a girly girl. I can't. I wouldn't be able to do it. But this is the way that I'm able to contribute, and and it's been a lot of growth for me too, because. I've always had such a respect for first responders, but it's even greater now. And I feel like because of the work that I've been able to do, I've been very much welcomed into this red and blue family,
sure.
which is huge. That's
sure.
That's the biggest benefit.
Sure. Everybody in the room here today has had schooling, and you think about the textbooks, and of course, you have that doctorate in front of your name, the PhD, however you want to, upplay that, downplay that. I'm sure you downplay it.
I downplay it all the time.
Yeah. Are there things how different, when from a learner standpoint, textbook, you have all those things that are there. How much was different when you got into the field and working with your clients and the professionals in the field? Can you kind of weigh through that a little bit?
Yeah. Textbook and learning, that provides a great foundation, but the skills that you learn are not always transferable in real life. And I think one of the things that I have found specifically in working with first responders is, when you become a therapist, when you're like a little baby therapist, you learn all of these do's and don'ts. You're told, you shouldn't shake your clients' hands. You shouldn't tell your clients anything about yourself. And I have found the exact opposite to be true when it comes to establishing relationships with first responders. It would be offensive if I didn't shake somebody's hand.
Sure.
Right. The amount of bro hugs
yeah.
that I give throughout the day sometimes, it's that's different. And, when you're establishing a relationship with somebody, here's the thing is that first responders tend to be pretty distrustful of somebody who's not inside their circle. So if they don't know who I am, the first time they walk into my office, they're like, who is this chick? How is she going to know anything about my life? And when you establish a relationship with anybody, it's built on trust. And a relationship is reciprocal. And so my clients do know stuff about me. They don't know my deepest, darkest secrets. They don't know everything about my relationship or, my life. But they know little things here or there which help to establish trust. And those are just some differences that you kind of have to learn along the way. And, you're taught, you can't have, we call them dual relationships, which basically means if somebody's your client, you don't interact with them in any other way.
Sure.
That doesn't work in this world. I will have a client and then I'll see them in a couple weeks at a training that I'm giving, or they'll get in a shooting and I have to see them to clear them back to work or something. And so you run into people, I could be at a restaurant and run into somebody that's working off duty.
Sure. How many first responders do you work with, your clients? You have a few?
I have one.
You have one?
I have one that I've seen for a very long time that I don't know if I will ever stop seeing.
Well, probably earlier on in your career, is there any differences from talking to these people when you know you have a first responder in front of you versus these people that may not be in the profession?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think I would probably mess somebody up that wasn't in the profession.
That's pretty good.
Because I mean, you ask what's changed. My sense of humor has completely, I've always been kind of dark, but now my sense of humor is very dark. I can laugh about things that probably the general public wouldn't laugh about. That first responders. I said it today in the training is humor is really good, and it is. It's dark humor. It's sometimes inappropriate for most people, and so that's one of the big changes. And just the level of stress is different. So, I joke with people, I live in Scottsdale. It's an affluent area. And when I was first building my practice there and I had to take on a couple of non-first responders, the stuff that would be stressful to them would be things like their landscapers didn't show up on the right day. Or the pool boy didn't do a good enough job. And so what has happened is my threshold has also changed. So if somebody says, I don't tolerate that anymore because, I mean, that's nothing, right? If you work in corrections, you've had inmates throw poop at you, right? You've been called bad names. You've been attacked and assaulted. You might have been ambushed, right? You've seen that, that's stress.
Yeah. I know you talked today, you're serving on some national advisory boards, and you're taking a trip out on the East Coast here soon for some agencies and speaking to some boards. And essentially, in the middle of trends, where we were, we talked about this yesterday with Eric, where we were, where we are current day, and then where we're seeing things moving forward. For the community here, maybe you could talk about things from a professional standpoint that you're really worried about right now. Inside the first responders, law enforcement, fire, EMS, and that, and then maybe add into there where things you have found we're on the right track and we're heading in the right directions.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the big problems that we're seeing, and I think it also depends on the area of the country that you're in. Obviously, there's been this anti-law enforcement specifically sentiment for some time, and I don't see that as present here in Dickinson, North Dakota, as I do in other areas of the country. So that's a problem, and I know Eric has talked about the recruitment and retention issues, and that stems from 2020 with the coronavirus, with all of the resignations. You combine that with an economy that's not really great right now, and it's difficult to find good people to do the job. And what that means is that the people that are doing the job, we need to work on keeping them and keeping them healthy. And I think that kind of goes into the direction that we've been headed over the last couple of years, is that officer, firefighter wellness is kind of the hot topic. It's what everybody's talking about right now. And departments are recognizing that they can't treat their employees like a badge number, that they're actually human beings.
I think you said today that we referenced the bumper sticker.
Mm-hmm. It is a bumper sticker. I mean, It's more than a bumper sticker, but we like to throw that word around. And, my worry is that agencies will say, oh, this is something that we have to do. We're going to establish a program. We'll check the box off, but really not implement it in a way that's most beneficial.
Yeah, and today there was a couple agencies, I think, specifically talking to you about, some peer support programs and things like that, trying to get up and running. Is that what I overheard?
Yeah, you overheard, right. Yeah, I mean, and that's a really good thing. So you've got a number of agencies that are thinking about starting peer support programs. And for people who are not aware of what that actually is, I mean, that's a group of employees who are specifically trained. So they're not just randomly selected and just practicing willy-nilly. They're trained to learn to talk to other employees about stress, to teach coping strategies or anger management strategies, to connect people with resources that would be helpful, to check in. I mean, the people who are within an agency have the best pulse on what's actually going on, and so peer support's a good option. And not everyone wants to talk to a shrink when something's going wrong. Yeah. Sometimes that peer supporter can be kind of the bridge to listening and then connecting with somebody else.
What have you seen on that? You talked about checking the box, and for the agencies that want to do it and bring it in. To me, it would seem that there is you got to really have some hard conversations about potential cultural shifts, and again, the stigma. You talked about that a lot today for our listeners out there, I mean, it's I know our community, they're really, really supportive of it, but, by and large, we are a very conservative area and such, so there's still a sense of, hey, you got to take care of yourself sort of thing. And so, again, weighing that in, for an agency like ours, if we were looking at trying to get up and running with that, I mean, that's long-term wise, I mean, is it a lot of work? Is it a lot more than just the buzzwords?
It is. I mean, it is a culture shift, and it starts with leadership being supportive and sending the message and being willing to have those hard conversations. It means willing to talk openly about things like suicide, for example, right? And like having a conversation about it and not treating it as like this, I wanted to say redheaded stepchild, but I feel like that's like a bad term these days. Right. But I said it anyway. Yeah. Right. But we have these terms that like no one really wants to touch. We just it feels kind of bad to say. We don't want to admit to it. But if we talk about it in the open, people are going to be more open when they're actually feeling that way and can actually get help. And so, yeah, leadership needs to be supportive. Agencies spend so much money on like tactical training and equipment and all of the stuff that keeps people physically safe. And so I think the mental component is just as important, because you don't perform well if mentally you're not at your peak.
I asked you the question earlier today, and for the listeners and them viewing us here in the community as first responders, do you have any are there any benchmarks throughout the career where we got to, as professionals, be really more cognizant of the burnout, or that 3-year, 5-year, 7-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year? Do you see anything in kind of a clear-cut way as you've practiced?
And it's really interesting you mentioned that. So a colleague of mine did some research on that, actually, and they were finding that the individuals who had been on in this like 6 to 10 year range were oftentimes struggling the most, right? When you enter the career, you're very excited and you're kind of gung-ho and you feel kind of invincible, right? And you're just excited to be doing this cool job. And then once you've been doing it for a while, you start to become like maybe a little jaded, kind of cynical. You start to recognize maybe that your personality's changed a little bit, that there's an impact on your relationships at home, that maybe you don't have as many friends as you once had. And once that starts to set in, and if you don't do anything with that cynicism, it kind of puts you in a really dark place. And so I think that that's an integral point. I think after the academy is an important point, when a person is like finally getting that real like hands-on experience doing the job. Prior to that 2 to 3 years before retirement is a really integral time, because we want to make sure that people are prepared for what they're actually going to do when they retire. Because like I mentioned today, you're so used to this adrenaline rush on the job, like where you're like, go, go, go all the time. And then all of a sudden that stops, and your body and your mind it's like a flip has been switched, and you see an increase in depression at that time. So make sure people have that. And then certainly, right, there's certain assignments that are more stressful than others. And like, we need to keep an eye on the people that are working child sex crimes, for example.
Right. Mike had asked you earlier, and we touched on about the individual happiness. You talk about morale, and you kind of expanded on your professional opinion on that. Maybe you could talk to the listeners, some of which will be some of the first responders in the area, and what your opinion is on that. What we know from yesterday, and Eric and you today, is like everybody's dealing with a lot of the same, maybe the different degrees and such like that. And morale is always a big one. And, you're in the room here, and we saw the sheets, the feedback that was provided today. She had an interactive exercise, and you had to put down, your different stressors and different things that you've dealt with maybe over the course of your life. But can you weigh through that a little bit and talk about what your opinion is on those things for an organizational standpoint?
Yeah. I mean, when we asked the group today, what organizational stressors they experienced, a lot of it was not related to the types of calls that they were dealing with at work. It was related to leadership, coworkers, policy changes. It was all of this stuff within, like, administrative stuff within an organization. And then after the training, we were talking a little bit about morale, and I said, employees are responsible for their attitude, their desire to change, but the organization and leadership is responsible for morale, right? Because those are the policymakers, those are the people that have the ability to change the culture. As a sergeant or a lieutenant, you have the ability with your own team, but if you're not having support from the top, or when, your guys go to another shift or another team, things can change. And so it really needs to be from the top down,
Sure.
treating your people like humans and not like numbers, and caring about them and making sure that they have meaning and purpose in their work.
Have you had to be involved at all in consulting and coming in at all with organizational changes like this?
Yeah. I mean, a little bit. I'm so focused on the mental health stuff that a lot of times I don't, but there's a chief out in California that I'm good friends with, and this is like one of his really big talking points is, we are responsible for our agency's morale. Like, how do we treat our people like they actually matter? And I feel like fire is a little bit better at this than police, because sometimes a lot of fire departments will look at their employees. They're like, no, like they're athletes. Like we have to treat them like they're athletes. Yeah. And so they take care of them in the same way that like an NFL team would take care of their football players, right? Like they feel like they matter.
And there's always been generational gaps. I mean, through the course of the work history and such, and in looking at the current stage with baby boomers and all the way through, do you see things? Do you see it legitimately improving? I mean, if you improving, the bumper stickers, yeah, but do you younger generation coming in? Do you feel? Do they have it more right? How right did we have it? With the baby boomer generation, with some of the grab your bootstrap sort of thing. Certainly, probably was some. There's some things to that. But can you talk about that element at all?
Well, I feel like there's a happy medium. I mean, you're right. So the boomer generation, it's very much like you got to suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like you're stronger than this. You're going to get through this. Like you just be a man.
Yep.
Right. Like don't complain. And I mean, it's not the worst mentality in the world, but the reality is that like bad things do happen and we have to deal with it and we have to learn to cope. And if we don't recognize the bad things that have happened to us and deal with it or take care of ourselves, what happens is we stuff it down. Ultimately, people end up kind of overflowing. And that comes out in burnout, or they make bad decisions. They're reckless, they're impulsive, they're aggressive. And so that's not a good thing. And then I feel like we have a very younger generation that literally like grew up on therapy. Like it's like they all have therapy. It's weird if they didn't go to therapy. And it feels kind of like the opposite, like their feelings are the most important thing. And I would like a happy medium where like we send this message that like you're strong and you can get through things, but it's also okay not to be okay.
Yeah, well said. And I think the other one we branched off on was talking about the expectations. I mean, from our community who has very high expectations of us here, and I think it obviously makes us perform better. But in that same vein, there's an element of, they want to know a little bit more with the body-worn cameras, and there's this expectation of exposure and things like that bring forward, maybe some stressors and some things that in 1999 even, that they may not have been dealing with inside the profession. So can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that that's increased the pressure. I mean, obviously, the people that get into these professions have the utmost integrity, right? Like that's one of the things that we look at upon hiring is somebody with good integrity. And so there's an expectation that you're going to make the right decision in the moment if you're having to act. But then with the body-worn cameras, I mean, it's good because at least like now we've got all the sides of a story. At the same time, does it cause somebody to second guess or say, well, I should have done that differently when, I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, right? You wish you could go back to that moment and make a different decision, but did you do everything in your power in that moment given the information you had? Most of the time, yes. Sure. But I think it's just been it's been a big change. The expectations from the community. I mean, anytime there's a critical incident, like it feels like the PIO has to address it right away. You're seeing agencies across the country create these, I mean, they're well-made videos just going over every single detail of an incident because people demand to know right away.
Yeah, and that's part of one of Mikey's gigs up at the police department as a PIO and weighing through that, and you want to give, and what not to give, and the expectations. So yeah, it's and probably so much so in the last 3 to 5 years, George Floyd being a big part of that. And so what about like at a national? Do you see anything right now on the horizon coming forward? And are there any initial or discussions happening you think that you see really as a positive thing for, let's say, law enforcement, fire, first responders, and the conversations you're crossing paths with?
One of the things that I think we're going to see a lot more of, and we're starting to see, especially in the wellness arena, are these annual, or maybe for some people it's every 6 months, depending, kind of wellness check-ins, where it's not therapy, it's not a fit for duty, but it's an opportunity for an officer or a firefighter to meet one-on-one with, a mental health professional and just kind of go over, how are their relationships? How are they sleeping? Are they drinking too much? How's work going? Has there been any trauma or critical incidents? How are things going with their kids? What coping skills do they have? I think we're going to see a lot more of that because I think that departments are recognizing that that's a really good preventative measure. And the good thing about that is that if something bad ever does happen and they feel like they need more professional help, like that relationship is already there.
Do you see that built into our agencies, first responding agencies? Are they mandating that? Or what does that look like?
A lot of departments are, I think it's better when they mandate it because when you mandate something, you're taking away the stigma. Now a person doesn't have to own up to wanting to talk to somebody. It's just something that's done. Thing is that if you're mandating it, that means the chief has to do it too.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite things is, sometimes I'll go into an agency and I'll do them right in the department. And it's so meaningful for other officers to see the chief walking in to do it too, because we talk about leadership, it comes from the top down. That's one way to improve morale. Killing a lot of birds with one stone.
Yeah. And so you're seeing more of that.
Yes, I think that's the direction that we're headed. I think that people will see that as it's low-cost preventative measure, establishes relationships, improves morale. It sends a message from a department to its employees that we care about you.
Yeah. No,
win-win.
Yeah, and me and Mike and I, we're on the same page with a lot of that, and think that's a good direction ahead. Sometimes progress, it might be slow, it's still progress. So, it's just a matter of kind of having those conversations and having people like you, I know here in front of the group is, it's just extremely important to be able to continue to move the ball down the field, for that. All I can say is that it was great today with you. It was phenomenal. I don't know if you have any parting words for us up here in the community of Dickinson or anything that you could add maybe as a last way here, because I know you have you're heading up to Minot after this.
Yes. Well, yeah, North Dakota, Minot, my second home, basically.
Yeah. So you were familiar. I thought maybe we would be your first up here for North Dakota. And you're like, nope. So
No, I have I basically also live in Minot. So,
yeah.
But I did make the comment today that I felt like Dickinson was a cuter city than Minot.
You did. And listeners, she was on the record with that. In front of 170 people.
The Minot crew, they gave me a little bit of a hard time about it, but I appreciate being welcome, with open arms, and it's always such an honor and a privilege to be walking into somebody else's house, right, and to being able to share a message and to have it received, and so it means a lot to me that you all care so much to bring me in to talk about what I think is such an important issue.
Yeah, it's still something we're working on. I'm pretty optimistic about it, where it's going. It seems like we have a wave coming through where we're picking up a little bit of momentum. I know even as an agency, there's a lot of conversations being had now. I'm going to talk and Lieutenant Matt Hansen that maybe we weren't having 10 years ago. So related to this specifically, the wellness policy stuff and peer support groups being talked about loosely, but. Yeah, and that just having people like you out there that are obviously advertising and selling this well, because at our profession, we're a hard sell.
What?
Yeah. So you got to have the right people in front there, because today you kept an entire audience engaged for, the time that you were there. And, I've been to many of these in the past in my career where they're just, maybe after an hour or 2 hours, you don't have that right person up there selling the message, and this profession is going to turn the switch off.
There's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there, because a lot of people recognize that this is the direction that public safety is going, and they see it as an opportunity to profit, which is not the right reason to be doing it.
Yeah. I know Lieutenant Hannell, he was extremely appreciative of you being here. Again, myself, the same. I hope we can cross paths down the road again here, and it's just been a great honor. And so we wish you safe travels.
Thank you.
Yeah, and back to the warmer weather of Scottsdale. Back to the warmer weather of Scottsdale.
I know. Everyone's like, what are you doing up in North Dakota, January, February, April now?
Yeah, right. Well, thanks a bunch, Katie.
My pleasure. Thank you.
are listening to Off the Cup Podcast with Dickinson, PD.
All right, here we are, everybody. Third and final day for the Dickinson First Responder Symposium here in Dickinson, and it really closed with a bang today. A couple people we've talked to leading up to this, you've seen just extremely intelligent people, what we refer to as the elite in the field, and that was the idea today, to let our community know that we're trying to bring in the best trainers and the best information for the first responders here in the area to kind of come back and provide you guys with the best public service that we can and to be the best people that we can. And today was a lot about that. I almost am tongue-tied and at a loss for words for where to even begin today because of the messages that were delivered, the information, the content. And so just real quick, I mean, today we got Mr. Codey Gandy, Echelon Front. How you doing, Codey?
Good, sir. Great to be here. Great day.
Yeah, it really was. I think I'm just going to, I think our community and the region are a big audience for us here, and I just maybe talk to them a little bit about yourself and Echelon Front and the primary mission for you guys, what you're out there and spreading, and we'll just see where things go.
Yes, sir. So my name is Codey Gandy, coming from Echelon Front. So I work for a company, veteran-owned, coming from Jocko Willick and Leif Babin, who were two Navy SEALs, early 2000s. They worked together in the Battle of Ramadi. And from there stemmed the lessons learned and the lessons that we teach here at Echelon Front. So we are a veteran-owned company. We teach lessons learned from the military, learned from combat, learned from training, and we relate those down to a common denominator where they're universal for every single aspect of your life. So personally, professionally, relationships at home, relationships at work, it's all universal. So that's our primary mission at Echelon Front, is to share the lessons that we learn from a military perspective, and we put them out in a universal language so that regardless of who you are, whatever organization, however many people you're in charge of, that these principles work in every single capacity.
Yeah, and so simple, but you kept hammering the drum, but yet it's not as easy as it sounds. And so you deal primarily with first responders with Echelon Front. And so maybe some things for our community, some things you see on the first responders that you come across in the nation when you're doing all of these trainings and stuff. Some of the biggest takeaways, I can imagine some of it maybe correlates into some of your conclusion that you had here today, but maybe some things that you hope really land home. You narrowed it down a little bit at the end, some things you really hope that the professionals here take away for the purpose of serving their community and what they do on a day-to-day.
Yes, sir. So I've had the unique opportunity the last 2 years working a lot with first responders, so police, fire, EMS, those that hold the line here back at home. And what's been unique about it is, sure, you have the spectrum of issues stemming from the West Coast, East Coast, Central, South, all that. And what's ironic about that is the problems that first responders face, the problems that the military face, the problems that every organization face, the problems are the same. There's no such thing as unique problems because our problems deal with egos, personalities, bosses, peers, subordinates, all that. Now, the variables may be a little different, and you're talking with first responders. The variables definitely are different than working with a tech company or an insurance company. So the variables are different, but the problems are the same. And some of these problems on a first responder basis, military basis, is people have the inability to overcome them because just due to the nature of the job, the nature of the beast on, hey, this is impossible. It's impossible to lead up when I'm a patrol and my chief's not on board. It seems impossible just due to the dynamic of what they do, and from a military perspective, it's a very common thing that we see all the time. But I will say, as much as that it has been unique, I worked with around 50 departments last year across the U.S., common themes throughout. You're talking about cover, move, relationships. A lot of first responder agencies, they only care about the relationships internally to their department. But when you think about it, like there's so many law enforcement agencies in North Dakota, in the U.S., there's so many fire departments, and teams literally handcuff themselves by not reaching out to other entities across the state, across the nation. And what is sad about that is there's a ton of opportunity for information, for resources across the U.S. in terms of how do I handle this situation? What tools are you using that make you successful? What not to do? All that information is out there, but a natural tendency for military, for first responders, for every organization is to remain in these little silos, these little bubbles, Whereas I'm going to wait for somebody else to come to me. And if they want this information, they better come ask me. And it's this stubborn ego mentality that a lot of people fall a trap into when literally the answers that people need, they're out there. So it's a common theme we see throughout. So you're talking about the laws of combat, which are cover move. You're talking about teamwork. You're talking about relationships. You're talking about simple, which is do I want to be simple? Do I want to be complex? We're talking about communication, and communication is one of the biggest things that I see people be ineffective as, which is relatively straightforward. How we communicate right now. A lot of people don't understand that there is a purpose associated with communication. That is for me and another individual to be aligned on what we're trying to do. But oftentimes we don't even take that into consideration. Communication is a big friction point with people because you have two people that like to communicate a different way. I like text, he likes email, he likes phone calls, I like in person, and you get this wash. And what I'm left with is two people that have no idea what they're doing. They're not aligned, and they're trying to create two different pathways to accomplish the mission. When in the reality, we need to be on the same page to accomplish what we're trying to do. So those are the first two, prioritize and execute. You're talking about, are people good at multitasking? The answer is no. I have 10 things going on. I can't solve all 10. I need to decide what's my biggest impact on my mission. I take that down and I work through the list. And what is so hard about that is typically with shifting priorities and multiple priorities, from a first responder perspective, there's a bunch of stuff going on. You have chaos, you have stress, you have problems, you have opinions, you have different priorities. What typically happens in the madness of the situation is people typically react emotionally to what they need to do in that moment in time. So we teach the concept, the tool, detachment, which basically is I'm taking a step back, I'm gaining some perspective, I'm trying to remove my emotions from that decision-making process because we, as humans, as a society, we don't make good emotional decisions. And we close the laws of combat with decentralized command, which is, hey, letting our subordinates, letting the team, giving them the capacity to step up and make a leadership decision. And why that is so critical is as an individual, as a leader, can I be everywhere at once? Can I solve everybody's problem? Can I be in everybody's ear and tell them, hey, go left, go right, go up, go down? I can't do that. I need to let my team make those decisions because they are closest to the problem. So I give them the insight, I give them the information, I give them that ownership so they can make decisions when they find themselves in those situations. And you wrap this whole thing up with the concept of extreme ownership. I mean, it's the name of the book. And really, if you end up reading the book, it's all these lessons learned from the Battle of Ramadi, which happened in 2006. And what's crazy about it is Jocko and Leif, they named the book Extreme Ownership for a really simple reason. One, it made them a very effective task, and it would change the Battle of Ramadi to be a successful mission. But two, it's the biggest natural tendency that we face as human beings. But it's very simple. Accountability, responsibility, and ownership. Why is it so hard? It is ingrained in us as human beings starting off at a very young age. That's why you never see a kid take ownership when they mess something up. They blame anything. They blame their brother, their sister. They blame the plant. They blame their parent when they're not even in the same state. And over time, what we gravitate towards is, ooh, I like the feeling when I'm not in trouble. I can blame somebody else. I can potentially get away from being in trouble. And here we are 31 years later. I'm like, I'm not taking ownership. There's a problem right there. Hey, you were there. You take ownership. Right. So that ownership piece, it's such a big catalyst to being successful as a human being because we play a big role when things do go wrong. And oftentimes we're naive at how big of a role that we do play. We'll just sit back, wait for somebody else, and then that problem just sits there and festers, and problems don't get better with time. So that ownership piece, that sums up what we're trying to accomplish here in teaching these principles to first responders, organizations across the world.
There's a big one that you went through today on the identification of ego. Identification of ego in human beings, professionally, personally, as that goes. And, we all got it. Like you said, you can feel the room when you start talking about that. You can feel, even at your tables, you can feel like, okay, maybe the shift, the body language, okay, all right. Is a bastard talking about me? Is he talking about the guy next to me here? He's like, no, he's talking about you. So I guess one of the things, we'll have some officers and such that probably will watch some of this after the fact, but do you get any advice for, for the identification of your own ego, for those, like sometimes I feel like, that self-reflection, self-awareness, and some advice on, for people out there that I don't have an ego, right? Bullshit. Well, we all do, to varying degrees, and as you say, on the spectrum. But you have some advice for the listeners or community such out there when we're looking at things, analyzing things, and our ego's getting in the way. How do we detach and kind of work through that?
Yes, sir. So there is a misconception. Oftentimes we talk about, hey, ego in this negative connotation, but to your point, everybody does have an ego. That's what drives people to be successful. It drives people to care. It drives us to make good decisions.
Well said.
to an extent. But when our ego fills the room, when I look around the room and people are coming up with a plan, I'm like, you know what? All these people are wrong. I'm right. When your ego gets out of control, when you have this alpha type personality where I'm going to dominate, I want to come up with the plan. I want to be the first person in the door. When you do that, you start to get out of control and you start to make the wrong decisions. So what I feel is a good tool in being aware of your own ego is when you start to hear conversations, when people start to bring up a plan, is to use that tool we call detachment, which is taking a second, take a step, and just observe. Just see what's going on. The ego will be in your ear. And what's crazy about this, in every situation, your ego is playing a role. When I'm teaching a presentation, my ego is in the back of my head like, they should understand that. You should say this. It's just driving almost every decision that we make. When you can hear that voice, when you can see the decision you're about to make and you stop and you recognize it, all I'm saying is we need to recognize that our ego is at play. It is in everything that we do. When you recognize it, you are aware of it, then you can start to make the decision. That's my ego. That's not what I should do. That's just my ego telling me that he's not wrong. I'm just unaware of his perspective on what he's trying to do. Because every situation, I mean, you talk about, if we're just sitting here right now and we just talk for 6 hours about ego and ownership, if I'm like, hey, you know that last sentence you said, it didn't make sense. If he told me that, my ego would literally be in the back of my head. Even though we just talked about this, he'd be like, he didn't hear that correctly. You know exactly what you said, which is crazy because he didn't hear what I said. His action that he made, it's wild. And oftentimes we see that all the time. People give feedback to us as instructors. If you give feedback to somebody else, literally attacking somebody's ego. What's cool about this is if you're aware of this, you can switch the concept of a debrief where, hey, I'm giving you feedback on what you just did. I'm not attacking your ego. When you're aware of it, it's, oh, this person actually cares. They want me to become better. They actually want me to get from here to here. That's just by recognizing that my ego is at play and I'm sharing my perspective on what that person is saying. So ego, we all have one. Be aware of it. When it gets out of control, that's when, hey, take a step back. Be aware of what you're doing. Is this ego driven or is this actually reality of what is going on?
Because I also see in these instances, even in my own life, I think back and talking about like these moments where you go off track, you identify it, you come back on track with certain things. I like today how you really hammered home this idea, like, yeah, but there's how many of these instances. Remember, guys, it's not one conversation; it's a campaign. And can you maybe highlight that a little bit in your own words?
I mean, if you're talking about anything that you're going to change from a personal perspective. So if I want to change, my diet, if I want to change how I exercise, and what we're talking about is how you change your natural tendency, how you think and how you operate. Any of those things that I just said, it's a campaign. It's not a magical pill. It's not an inoculation. I don't leave here and I'm like, cool, that's going to be easy. Next time when problems go wrong, I'm going to raise my hand and say it's my fault. That's not typically how this works because every time you try to incorporate change, you're going to be hit with roadblocks. You're going to have people that challenge you, that disagree with you, that challenge you, go, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And these roadblocks, they're put there to try to derail you from becoming a better person. So I think from a campaign perspective, understand that everything that you typically do, it takes a little bit of time. And as long as you're aware of that, a lot of people only see change as, hey, this end state. And they're like, holy cow, that's going to take me 3 years to get this done. So you put these tentative, small victories in place where, hey, you know what, this month, instead of building a relationship with all 300 people in my department, which is what I want to do, hey, I'm going to do 10 this month. And that's a small goal. And what's nice about that is you reinforce this positive reinforcement on, hey, I did this. And there's progress. It's a little progress, but it's progress in the right direction. One small step on this campaign. And eventually, over time, which people don't like to hear, over time, I get here, I have 20, 30, 50, and eventually I get to my end goal. So putting these, good roadblocks on, hey, this metric, did I meet this? Am I successful? That's positive reinforcement. We love positive reinforcement. It reassures us that we're doing the right thing. And I put those moments in time in place so that eventually I get to the end, I'm like, oh, I'm halfway there. That was really easy. It's just a little effort, a little time, and then I eventually get there.
Are you ready to submit your letter into Echelon for a little side hustle? Come work for the DPD up here. You said you weren't not a fan of the cold, though.
Not a fan of the cold. I lived in Arizona, Hawaii, and I live in California right now, and I'll take 120 over, this is my shocky, but 40, that's too cold for me.
That's too cold, yeah. Yeah, the breadth of your guys' campaign at Echelon Front is across the country right now, and we're really lucky here. We're in North Dakota with the support from the community and our marketing, our imaging, our branding. It's it's unprecedented probably in some regards to that. So we know that our listeners and our people here that are supporting us, and that's not everywhere. And I'm sure you feel that, when you're in the room at these certain areas and across the country with, different things that they're dealing with, but how do you feel using that? And this is a broad brush, but as a first responder profession right now, how do you feel about things? How much more work needs to be done? This is a never-ending sort of campaign, but the direction of first responders, across the country, how has your take been on that, interacting with what you do?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of hiccups over the years that put this black eye, this negative connotation for law enforcement, for first responders, and you see this incident and it drops everybody's perception on police officers down here, and then it's just rebuilding mode, and then another incident and then it drops everybody down. So it is a campaign approach to try to bring back the spotlight on what first responders actually do. It typically takes, you think about any organization, not even first responders, you can include them, but typically in an organization, it's not like 500 people for IBM. They may all make one decision and that causes the industry to crash. It typically is one single person making one single action, and the influence that has on an entire organization gets blown out of proportion. So in that aspect, it is absolutely a campaign. And what's interesting about that is every state, every department is going to have its own path. And obviously, the end state, the mission is for everybody to be aligned, but everybody's pathway is going to be a little different. So I think from a first responder perspective, I'm obviously not one, but I work a lot with them. The more aligned that we can be, you start with North Dakota. You have alignment across the state on what do we want to do? What do we want to achieve? We want to get better at community policing, where we're building the bridge with civilians, which is cool about that is that's what we're doing right now. You're sharing this not only with the listeners who are first responders, but opening up to the community. You're giving insight on what these guys are going through. So it starts there. You have Dickinson who is doing this, and then you bridge the gap to, Stark Sheriff, to Grand Forks, and now you have multiple departments working towards an aligned goal, which is to get back on the page. And then it doesn't stop there. So we have North Dakota, you go to South Dakota, you start to bridge the gap. And eventually over time, you have the 50 states, 50 different departments from each state, all working towards that common goal. Now, whatever that goal is, that is the ultimate question. Like, where do we want to be in the next 5 and the next 10 years? Does it want to be, better at community policing? Do we want to be more involved with the community in every aspect? Like, what does that look like? I don't have that answer. All I do know is there should be some alignment from a department perspective, from a state perspective, and from a national perspective as well.
You talked about it today. How come you didn't make the jump and the leap to get into the uniform? Your father, you got the pedigree a little bit, right? You got the military end of it, of course, but your dad, he's a 31-year veteran, right? Homicide, Stockton PD. He's probably got a lot of stories, and you obviously grew up in that kind of household with it. So was there anything holding you back from jumping full into the first responder realm?
The only thing that holds me back is this logo on my shirt is Echelon front. So when I got out of the military in 2015, my dad's been a cop my whole life, and it's what I always wanted to do. Military was just a different path, but my end state was to become a cop. So I was in backgrounds in California. I got invited to come see an Echelon front event, and I was absolutely blown away. I was shocked. And for me, from my perspective, I've been a very stubborn person. I don't like change like a lot of us. I have this big ego. And honestly, when I came out to support an Echelon front training, I was a little unsure on how these principles would relate to people outside the military. First responders, they're paramilitary, but it's different. Like what you do and what I did, it's drastically different. You guys have a way tougher job. And then you have the civilian sector. I'm like, there's no way that Jocko, Leif, these Navy SEALs can teach the laws of combat to civilians. People have no idea what the military does. And I went out there, and it's not about the military. It's not about the tactic. It's about lessons learned that work in every single aspect of your life, personally and professionally. When I went out there and I saw the transformation of people that were like, I've been here for 30 years. Like, this is stupid. There's nothing you could teach me. To the end of the day being like, hey, for the last 30 years, I've been a really poor leader. All by simply Jocko and Leif influencing these people to change how they think, how they operate as an individual. I was shocked. I was blown away to the point that I gave up my passion that I've wanted to do for 26, 27 years of becoming a law enforcement officer. I was like, I'm going to put that on hold because this opportunity right here, it's not going to be there in the next couple months. I can go back into law enforcement potentially down the road. And luckily for me, working with first responders over the nation the last couple of years, it fills the void tentatively. And so I have no complaints where I'm at right now. I love what I do. I love getting to work with first responders. It's really close to my heart. My dad's still active out in California, and I get to walk through these concepts with him constantly all the time, trying to figure out what's working, what's not working. And it's an honor to get to do what I do.
Yeah. How is your dad with it, with you doing this role there? What is it from a father-son sort of relationship?
I think it's interesting. Father-son, I think that's your subordinate leader perspective just on steroids. My dad's 30 years older than me, so I'm trying to tell my dad what to do. Like, hey, you're doing this wrong. You want to talk about ego, have your kid tell you that you're doing something wrong. That's tough. I even face that now with my 5-year-old. He's like, hey, Dad, you should do this instead of that. And immediately, even though I teach this, I'm like, he's attacking my ego. I need to show him that I'm the dad and I'm the parent. So it's crazy. So I think at first when I was new, there was that like, you don't know. Like, you're not a cop. You don't know what I've been through. But over time, just showing him the mirror on, hey, these things work. Like, look at what we've done the last 10 years at Echelon Front. It opened up the opportunity. And all it takes is a crack at the door for someone to be like, oh, this stuff works. They give it a try. And then over time, they're like, wow, like my situation's a lot better. Wow, problems are actually going away. Wow, I can take ownership of a lot of stuff. All these external factors. There is a fascination with military and first responder on things that are outside of our control. You have the city council, you have the Pentagon, you have all these people in these upper tiers, and we blame on all that stuff. But the reality is you control what you can control, which is yourself. And so that crack that I opened with my door, I'm able to show him a lot of the things. And I mean, he lives 2 miles from me. So oftentimes I debrief him, hey, I was just up in North Dakota, we ran into this issue. And he's like, hey, I've seen that, I see that. So I get a lot of perspective from somebody really close to the job, which allows me to communicate, use the verbiage, talk about examples that he's seen and we see as a kind of aligned unit there.
You ever still get the dad stick? Does he ever pull out the dad stick on you and you go out there?
Dad stick, dad belt, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I think we'll close with this. Codey, it was a captivated audience today. I know there's a lot of people in the room that are going to hope that they cross paths with you again in their life. I know Mike and I here ourselves are one of those that we hope that there's a time I can see you, get across the room, get that bro hug going on. And I'm hopeful that the message that you sent today for our agency and for all the other attendees that were here can last for a long time. And so really appreciate your time up here with us, and we wish you the best. Where are you headed to next?
I go home, and then I'm headed to Idaho on Sunday. So we're going to run a police department through our field training exercise, which is our hands-on application of these principles. So looking forward to our first law enforcement field training exercise. So looking forward to getting after it up there. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe we'll get there one day, Mikey. Get that on the hook. But thanks a bunch, Codey. Okay, safe travels, man. Thank you, sir. Appreciate being here.